Hello out there, this is Bob Phillips with Thrive Wellness, and today's wellness topic is reducing your chronic disease risk, proactive steps for primary prevention. So today's agenda, we will touch on statistics for chronic disease. We'll talk about what does it mean to actually be at risk. We'll look at chronic disease prevention from a few perspectives, nutrition and exercise. And we'll also look at modifiable versus non-modifiable risk factors and the difference between those two things. We'll look at intermediate risks, and we will touch on keys to prevention and early detection of chronic disease. And finally, we will put it all together and talk about what steps we should take to reduce chronic disease risks. Defining chronic disease. So, chronic diseases are defined broadly as conditions that last 1 year or more and require ongoing medical attention or limit activities of daily living or both. Chronic diseases such as heart disease, cancer, and diabetes are the leading causes of death and disability in the United States. Next, we'll touch on statistics of chronic disease. Prevalence of chronic disease. The incidence of chronic disease over the last several generations has risen steadily. Currently, 6 in 10 adults in the United States have a chronic disease, while 4 in 10 adults in the United States have 2 or more chronic diseases. When we talk about chronic diseases, we're speaking of conditions such as heart disease, cancer, chronic lung diseases, stroke, Alzheimer's disease, and type 2 diabetes. So we defined chronic disease and looked at some key statistics of chronic disease. But what does it actually mean to be at risk for chronic disease? So being at risk means that you have a presence of some lifestyle, genetic, or biometric value that increases your chances of a chronic disease. Risk can be either modifiable, meaning we can change circumstances of that risk. An example would be diet or exercise. Risk can also be non-modifiable, meaning we cannot change the basic nature of that risk. And that might be our gender or our family heritage. The important thing is knowing exactly what your pool of risks are and being able to act on that information to make changes in your life to help you prevent chronic diseases over time. It's important to recognize that the development of chronic disease is very much a process. So we have certain common modifiable risk factors and non-modifiable risk factors that over time develop into intermediate risk factors. So these intermediate risk factors are already a sign that the disease process is taking place. And if left untreated or we don't make any changes, that can lead to full-blown diseases, such as heart disease and cancer, for instance. So again, the development of chronic disease takes place slowly over time, over many years. It's not something that we just wake up with. So with that said, we all have many opportunities before and during this disease process to make meaningful change and hopefully prevent these conditions from taking place. So let's look a little closer at non-modifiable risk factors. Again, these are things like age, ethnic background, genetics and family history. You could also throw gender into that equation as well. So again, these are risk factors that we cannot change. We simply don't have control over it. However, the good thing is that the vast majority of chronic disease risk is related to our lifestyle and our environment. And these are things we have some control over. From non-modifiable risk factors to modifiable risk factors. So again, these are risk factors that we do have some control over based on what we choose. These are risk factors such as poor diet, lack of exercise and inactivity, tobacco use, and stress, to name a few. So modifiable risk factors do have a greater impact on overall risk than do the non-modifiable risk factors. To illustrate that, here is a key statistic. So if we were able to eliminate just 3 lifestyle risk factors, 3 major ones, poor diet, lack of exercise or physical activity, and smoking, we would be able to prevent 80% of heart disease, 80% of type 2 diabetes and 40 to 50% of cancer. So let's look a little closer at one of those modifiable risk factors, nutrition, and its impact on chronic disease. So this next passage here is from the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, a very important study. So chronic disease does not arise from any one dietary culprit, but from a complex interaction of multiple nutrition factors directly linked to the excessive consumption of common industrial foods, such as dairy products, refined cereals, refined grains, refined sugars, refined vegetable oils, fatty meats, salt, and the combination of these foods. When we see the term common industrial foods, that is referring directly to our standard American diet pattern, and we'll look at that a little bit closer next. So what that American Journal of Clinical Nutrition study was referencing was exactly the standard American diet. They used the term common industrial foods, kind of interchangeable. But basically, this dietary pattern is undoubtedly a significant factor in the development of chronic disease. So the vast majority of calories we consume in this country are from refined grains that have been stripped of their fiber and nutrients, and in most cases have had sugar, fat, and salt added to them. The second largest portion of the standard American diet is animal products, and mostly the poorest choices, unfortunately, within this group, such as red meats, refined meats, such as bacon and sausage, and high-fat dairy products. So the smallest portion of the standard American diet, plant foods, represents the healthiest, most nutrient-dense food, is basically an afterthought in this dietary pattern. So again, the foods that are most health-promoting, that offer the most disease preventive benefit, we are getting truly the least of in our standard American diet. In part 2 of our discussion, we'll talk through further lifestyle means by which to prevent chronic disease, a little bit further on nutrition, exercise, and we'll also touch base on intermediate risk factors. So what happens as disease states begin to progress, and the intermediate risk factors are those identifiable signs and symptoms that disease might already be taking place. And then finally, we'll wrap up the discussion with if I'm ready to start making better decisions, better lifestyle decisions, what do I do to start crafting a plan to better prevent chronic disease in my life?